everybody, what's up? In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to use Logic Pro 11 in order to make awesome backing tracks that you can use to practice your guitar soloing over any chord progression that you desire. And so without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so we're gonna start off here with a blank project. It's not totally blank. I've set up a couple of things, but you just go ahead and start a new Logic session. And we're going to be going through this really easy process of making a backing track with some of the new features that Logic 11 has, namely the sort of studio musician tracks that you can use. So once you've got your new session set up, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make a new track, and we're going to go to session player. Now we're going to use all three options, so we're going to make each one individually. So let's go ahead and start with a drummer. Now you can pick what style drummer that you want. Let's go ahead and let's just stick with the pop rock one for right now, and then we're going to create another track, which is going to be a bass player track. Let's just stick with all the default settings for right now. And then we are going to create a keyboard player track. Now, of course, if you are a guitar player, you may actually not want to create a keyboard player track if you want to practice like playing in a trio format, for example, and you want to be able to throw chords in the middle of your solo or practice your rhythm guitar playing. But for right now, we're going to go ahead and stick with this a full rhythm section with the keyboard player, drummer, and bass player. So as you can see, a couple of things happened. It's actually already gone ahead and made a whole bunch of parts for us. So let's go ahead and hear what they sound like. Okay, cool. And you can see that there's actually also a chord progression that has already been written out for us here. You can see the chord progression up on the top here of the edit window. You can see the chord progression is C, D minor, and then A minor for 2 bars. So this is where we're going to be doing a lot of stuff here. Whenever we want to change the chord progression, we're going to go up to this button here, which is Show Hide Global Tracks. And up here, we can actually go ahead and start changing chords by double-clicking where each chord is written. So we're not going to do that right now. We will in a second, but I just want to go over some of the parameters here that we can tweak, because first of all, I think that already this sounds pretty good. Like if I wanted to go ahead and play over this, I could go ahead and just loop this section. And now all of a sudden, you know, if I'm just working on, for example, learning my notes in the key of C or something like that, this is actually already in the key of C. By the way, by default, this is going to be in the key of C for us. But if I wanted to, I can actually already start practicing just soloing over this. And actually, by the way, if you're not familiar, for example, with playing over chord progressions and stuff like that, this is actually a pretty decent chord progression to start to work on. We're not going to dig into soloing over chord progressions, triads, and all that stuff. I've made tons and tons of different videos about that topic that you can go ahead and check out on the channel. So we're just going to stick to making the different backing tracks. Now, right off the bat, what I'm actually going to go ahead and do is I'm going to bring up the mix window down here. And I'm going to bring down these tracks because by default, they're all set at 0 dB. So for the most part, I don't find that I want to have rhythm section tracks set that high. Let's go ahead and bring them down to -5. And as you can see, I selected all 3 of these just by hitting the Shift key, and then you can select them all at the same time. So now it's going to be mixed a little bit better with my lead guitar sound here is actually, let's bring that to 0. My lead guitar sound now should be louder. We will always want our guitar sound to be a bit louder than the actual backing track. So let's just see how that mix is coming out. Cool. So that has a little bit more of a balance there. I might actually go ahead and just bring up that lead guitar track a little bit. And of course, this is something here that's going to go according to your personal taste as to how you want things to be mixed. Okay, so now once we've got our basic track set up, we can actually change lots of different parameters here. So what I'm going to do is double click right here on the actual audio region that's been set up by Logic here. And now you should see on the bottom here that there are some different things that we can tweak. There are so many cool different things that we can do so that we can actually put our own creative sauce onto what's going on. Even though all this stuff is kind of automatically generated by Logic, I think that there's a lot of things we can actually learn about playing as well and arranging by messing with these different session player tracks. So we have complexity. So if I slide that up, it's going to make the drum part, well, more complex. So let's see what happens. Let's just go ahead and slide that all the way up and see what the drum part sounds like now. Interesting. So there's a very interesting accent pattern going on here, right? So I don't really like that groove too much. For the most part, you don't want drum grooves to be super complex because it can be very, very distracting, especially if I'm trying to do something like solo over a track, right? So intensity, let's go ahead and bring that down. As you can see, that's pretty high. So for the most part, that's just going to be how loud are the drums playing. So we had that. Let's slide it down and see what it sounds like now. So definitely a lot more chilled out. Actually, I kind of like that a little bit better. So for the most part, you don't want a lot of the drum parts in a song to, or at least in a song with a vibe like this, to be super intense. Now, the cool thing that we're going to get into in a second is that we can use these parameters to not just change this little 8-bar loop that we have, but then on top of that, we can actually add more sections by going right here. If you go just to the right of any of these regions, all of a sudden now, you just added a whole entire different section that we can change the parameters to, and that way the backing track is actually going to be dynamic and it's going to be changing, and it's not just going to be the same loop over and over. So that way it can actually be a lot more interesting, okay? So with that said, let's just stick to this first section here, the first 8 bars of the track. And also, we have all these different things here. So there's different accent patterns that we can put on both the cymbals and on the kick and snare drum. So, for example, you can actually go ahead and over here, you can do this all manually, but we have a bunch of preset different patterns that are built in. So let's go ahead and loop this section here. And again, right now we're just messing with the drum part, okay? And the last thing we're gonna end up doing, by the way, is going to be changing the chord progressions and stuff like that. And I actually find this to be a bit of an educational thing too, if you're more of a beginner intermediate player, because a lot of times we think of trying to make just in general our music more interesting by changing the chords and changing different things having to do with the notes. But I actually really, really enjoy using Logic to make these tracks like this, because it teaches us actually that there's all these different musical parameters that make things more interesting that aren't just changing the notes. And actually changing the notes and the chords is a very, very small portion of what goes into making something interesting. So let's just test out a couple of these. We're not going to play all of them, but for example, we had that pattern. So pattern number 5. All of these, by the way, are set up in a sort of 16th note grid here. That top dot is all your snares, and then the bottom dots are your kicks. So you have a kick on beat 1, and then you're gonna have a snare on beat 2, and then a kick on the and of 3. So let's see if that's exactly what happens here. So you can hear that if I'll raise those drums really loud for a second. So you can hear it. Boom, da, boom. Boom, da, boom, boom, da. So you can see that exact snare and kick pattern being represented here in this pattern here. So let's just test out a couple of the other ones. It seems that some of them are very similar. For example, number 1, you can see right there is the similar thing. You have boop, da, boop. So you have the same sort of beginning as number 5, but then the second half of it is different. So let's see what that number 1 sounds like. So this one sounds a bit more simple. Let's just raise those drums up just so that you can hear it better. Let's see if we can just actively change between some. And let's try number 8. Let's see how that one sounds like. So that one is a little bit more complicated, right? Without raising the complexity slider over there, all of a sudden this groove is a lot more complex because it is actually more 16th note based. You can see right there that you have these accents on the kick and snare like they're happening right next to each other, whereas a lot of these other patterns here are actually more spaced out in 8th notes. So I don't necessarily like how that one feels. Let's try number 7. This one looks much more sparse. 6 and 7 looks much more sparse. Let's try that one. Okay, so I don't know if I just in general like the having the snare occurring on beat 3. That's kind of a weird sounding. I don't think that feels good. There's definitely more of a vibe of having the snare hitting on 2 and 4. So you could see a few of these. Here's the snare on 2. Here's the snare on 4. Here's the snare on a 2. Here's the snare on 4. So I'm gonna stick with actually. Let's try. Last one we'll try out is number 2. I like that one, actually. That one's a little bit more straightforward than a number 5 because we have that accent on beat 3 and the and of 3. So let's go ahead and stick with that one there. And actually, we'll go ahead and change this next one. So I like to, for the most part, keep the pattern consistent. So we're gonna go ahead and change it on that next 8 bars too, to pattern number 2. We may change it later, but let's just kind of keep it consistent because I like to tweak some of the other parameters of what's going on rather than the actual material that the drums are playing. So, with that being said, we have a few other things. You can add more ghost notes. Those are going to happen a lot of times on the snare. Let's see what happens if I slide that all the way up. You can also adjust the feel. So, pushing a lot. I slid that up to push a lot. So that's definitely a bit too much. A lot of times I like to test to see how much this thing is going to change what's going on by sliding it all the way up or all the way down. And then usually that's not going to sound good to slide any of these sliders all the way up. So you could see it was basically borderline, like just completely out of time there. You got dynamics. A lot of times the dynamics can really help make the performance sound a lot better. So it kind of defaults there at 57%. Let's see what happens if we roll that one all the way up. So you can hear right there that there's some parts that are like really loud, like with the cymbals or something like that, and then the snare will be like really quiet. So there's a lot of contrast in the dynamics. So that's a little bit too much. Let's keep it more in the middle here. It is generally a good thing, in my opinion, to have good dynamics and have more dynamics going on. We'll also bring those ghost notes back down. But as you can see, there's a lot of really cool things. Humanize, I would suspect that is going to make it kind of sound a little bit more out of time as well, but reduce the consistency of the time. Let's see what it sounds like if we slide that all the way up. 100% human. It's going to be just like a real human playing. Let's see what happens. Yeah, so there you could hear that hit was a little bit late. Yeah, so there's some hits that are behind and stuff like that. Actually, putting that all the way up wasn't the worst thing in the whole entire world. But let's go ahead and keep it. Let's keep it around. Let's keep it around here. That's a good place to have it. A lot of the default settings are not too bad in here. A lot of times, just to give you guys a shortcut, what I like to do is mess with this complexity and intensity graph. So for example, now let's go to the next 8 bars of the drum track. And now what I'm gonna do is bring the intensity up quite a bit. And then the last thing that we'll talk about with the drums, again, we're spending a lot of time in the drums because the drums are super duper important as to how a backing track that we're playing on is going to feel. So you can change what is kind of being used as the right hand of the drummer. So if those of you who aren't familiar with drums, the right hand of the drummer, if it's a right-handed drummer, is typically what's playing the hi-hat. So by default, it's actually on the hi-hat, but in different sections of songs, then the drummer will transition to playing the right hand pattern on the ride cymbal or on the floor tom, okay? So the floor tom kind of has a more breakdown type of feel to it. So let's go ahead and loop this section here. And as you can see, by the way, little detail up there, you see how now it just says A minor. So our chord progression is going to kind of go out the window. So if I wanted to keep that same chord progression, which I don't, we're going to change it later, so I'm not going to go ahead and bother copying and pasting it. But what I would do is I would select this, I would open that menu, and then I would hit Option, click and drag this, and then it would copy the exact same chord progression. Let's just go ahead and leave it like this. So it's actually going to be hanging out in an A minor chord in the second bar, or second 8 bars. So now you can hear, look, there's a completely different feel to it, but it's really cool. So it got louder, the drums got louder, and then on top of that, there's no more cymbals anymore. It's basically all on the floor toms here. You did hear a crash cymbal as part of the fill. So automatically when we get to different sections, like every 8 bars, it's very cool. The drums will put a fill in there. And if we wanted to, by the way, we can actually, if we want more fills, we can make these sections shorter and chop them up into little bits, and it will put fills in between each of those blocks. And it will put some fills in between. You can also slide here how many fills you want, how complex you want the fills to be. We will not mess with that. Let's just listen to actually what this transition is going to be like here. Cool. So by the way, I'm just kind of feeling like this is a little bit slow. So what I'm going to go do is go up here. I'm going to hit this little arrow here so that I can find the tempo of the project. And let's go ahead and bring this up to like around 85. That was at 70 before, but now we're going to put it at 85. Well, I'll go ahead and leave that there. So now all of a sudden it's going to be a bit different. Yeah, that feels a bit more lively. This can be a little bit more fun to play on. Awesome. So I do like that tom thing. I would probably put something like that later in the track. Okay, if I'm going to make like a 4-minute long track or something like that, I might put it later. But what I'm going to do actually is I want the intensity to go up more. So I'm going to change this section here. Notice how I have this block highlighted. So it's only going to apply to that block. I'm going to make this into a ride cymbal groove here. So now let's listen to what happens. So we're going to be going from the hi-hat here to the ride cymbal in the next 8 bars. So now all of a sudden you can see, like, if I'm soloing over that, I'll start from a bit before here. If I'm soloing over that, it's gonna kind of make me want to play a little bit differently there because, well, the rhythm section's giving me more energy. So maybe in this beginning half, I might be playing with a little bit less intensity going on, a little bit more sparse, and then I'm going to go ahead and start playing some more stuff there. So this is really cool how we can kind of get this responsiveness to the track. So let's see what that would sound like just for fun. Yeah, so this is, it just feels different switching over to that ride cymbal. Okay, so let's check out the different parameters for the bass. So with the bass, you have these different presets actually that you can use. And for the drums as well, by the way, there's different presets. I forgot to mention that earlier. I don't typically use those different presets, but they are pretty cool. So what I'm going to do is actually use this one of these different presets. This one is called Unwritten Path here on the second 8 bars of the bass part. Now, what happens is that you can actually change how many notes the bass is going to play by going here to where it says melody. Okay, so for the most part, if I'm trying to practice and make a track for practicing soloing over chord progression, I'm going to stick to mostly root only or some notes. I don't necessarily want the bass to be playing a whole bunch of different notes. Now, if you notice, by the way, if I click most notes, you can actually even visually see right there in the region all these different notes that are going up and down, pop up. Whereas if I have root only, they kind of stick there. Like this would be my C note, this would be my D bass note, and then my A bass note, and it's kind of just sticking right on each of those notes. So I'm gonna go ahead and change a couple of things here. Let's bring the complexity down a little bit more. Let's bring the intensity down to match those drums. Remember how we brought the complexity and intensity down to the drums? Well, for the most part, I wanna actually change the bass along with the drums. The bass and the drums really, really work hand in hand when we're making one of these tracks. So now, let's see what happens when we switch from this bass part to the next bass part, which I'm gonna actually bring the complexity down a little bit there. So I used one of these presets, Unwritten Path, and you can hear that's much more complicated. Let's listen to that one. So similar deal to the drums, we have the complexity, intensity, but now we have to keep in mind sort of what notes we want to have it play, how active basically we want the bass to be. One other thing to think of is the phrasing here. So if you want it to kind of feel a little bit funkier type of thing, you're going to make that a short phrasing, and now you're going to get a really staccato type of feel. So that a lot of times actually can feel cool. I generally like the medium phrase. Long phrasing is cool too if you really want to hear that bass ringing out. It's really filling up a lot of space with that long phrasing. Let's keep it on medium phrasing, and I will add a little bit of fills here, just a little bit, and a little bit of fill complexity, because I don't want it to be totally static on each of those notes. So that's the cool thing, is that you can independently control sort of how many notes get played by the bass by changing this melody setting and changing these fill settings here. So if you want the bass to be, for the most part, nice and static so you can hear those chords and not be distracting, but you want a little teensy weensy bit of extra activity going on, you can add some more of those fills in. Let's see what that would sound like. Looks like there's going to be a fill right here coming up, going back to the C chord. So you had just a kind of one extra note that happened there. So now let's address the keyboard stuff. So the keyboard, again, I'm not going to go through every single thing that we can do here, because this video is already going to be kind of long, and it would be ridiculously long if we did every single thing, but it's going to be really, really helpful for you to just see the different things that we can do with all these parameters. But obviously we could sit here all day messing with this stuff, and it's a lot of fun, because all we're doing is basically knob turning, and we're seeing all of these changes happen in real life. And again, like I was saying earlier, I think that this is actually useful even if you're not using these session player tracks. It's very useful for you to just think about in your own music when you're recording and composing things, to be thinking about all these different parameters and sort of actually baking them into your own compositions and your own even solos and things like that. You could be thinking, when I'm playing a solo, adding a little bit more intensity or taking the intensity away, or complexity, etc., etc., etc. So the keyboard part, I like to, for the most part, keep simple as well. So what we're going to do is actually, let's add, for the left hand, we're going to make it the root and the octave, because it's going to make it sound a little bit more full. And so you're hearing, you hear a little bit more fullness, and the most fullness from the left hand is if you add the root fifth and the octave. Let's see what that sounds like. So that's actually a little bit too much because as you can hear, it's starting to clash and conflict with the bass a little bit. So we don't want too much stuff going on in the low register or else it sounds very muddy. So a lot of times I like to just stay with the root and the octave because that way you're not going to get things changing and get things muddying up the waters in the low register. It's very important to pay attention to low register when you're making tracks like this, and just in general when you're making music. So now I want to let's see what happens if we bring these fill amounts down, because there's kind of a lot of stuff. There's a lot of movement going on. And let's see if we just bring everything down here. You can make this super simple, by the way, making it 2 voices. And let's see what it sounds like now. Okay, so now let's work on the second half. So along with the drums and the bass getting more intense, let's make the keyboard get more intense. So we're going to make sure that we have the full chord voicing, and we're going to make the movement range a little bit larger. Let's see what that sounds like. So let's go ahead and bring that fill amount down and bring that fill complexity up a little bit. Let's see what that sounds like. And by the way, if you want to, you can actually just take one of the hands out by clicking this. Of course, this just takes everything out, so I don't want to do that. But you can make it left hand only. And you can isolate what's going on here. So maybe here you hear that root in the octave. That actually sounds really cool. That would be cool to put later on in the track, is just take that right hand away completely. Or you could do the same thing like I was talking about earlier, that the bass and the piano can potentially clash sometimes. Well, you can just take out the left hand if that's the case too. I actually kind of like that. I think I'm going to do that in this section because I want the bass to be a little bit more complex here, and I do want the keyboard to be more complex, but I don't want them to be stepping on each other. So actually, let's stick with that. We're going to leave the left hand gone from this keyboard part here. So now let's see what we have so far with this track. Grace notes. You can add a little bit more grace notes. That's going to add some more notes that are outside of the chord. This hanging out on the A minor chord almost sounds like it would be the end of a song or something like that. Now, finally, let's get into changing the chord progression. So, first of all, it really helps if you know your music theory and you know what chords fit in different keys. But what we can do is now start changing things, okay? So what we're going to do is let's go ahead and stick to the key of C, and we are going to make a chord progression that doesn't start on a C chord. So let's make the first chord F, and then let's make the next chord A minor, and then we're going to make the next chord G, and then we're going to make the next chord after that C. Now let's see what that sounds like, and I'm going to remove these chords that were there for 1 second. So now when I've made that loop, now I can just select those chords and option drag so that I can copy paste them, and I will option drag again the doubled up one so that now we get all the chords going on the next 8 bars. And you know what, now what I'll do actually, just to change things up, let's change the chord progression here. So instead of F, A minor, G, C, which if you're familiar with your theory is a 4, 6, 5, 1 progression. So what we're gonna do is actually, let's change that to a G chord. Let's make that a G chord, which is the 5 chord. And then we're gonna make this into a C chord as well. So we will have a sort of endpoint to the loop when it goes back around. So cool. So, and then that's going to go ahead and loop back around. That can be a really cool trick, by the way, when we are writing a chord progression, is don't just make it one 4-bar loop the whole entire time, but maybe make it an 8-bar loop. If I wanted to, I could take this section and put it over here as well, but let's just leave it like this. So it's actually a 16-bar loop in total. And we can expand this even further, obviously, but that would start to take quite a while when it comes to doing this. So the cool thing is that if we're thinking in the number system, like 4, 6, 5, 1, I can now, if I want to practice a different key, all I have to do is go right here and change the key. So for example, I'm going to hit create key signature. And actually what I did is I just right click there. So let's go ahead and make it, let's not do E. Let's go to the key of D. So now all of a sudden, look at all the chords changed. Now it gave me the exact same chord progression in the key of D instead. So that's why this is such a powerful tool for practicing guitar, because now I can, first of all, get used to sort of some ideas of production and stuff, which a lot of us, need to work on more, including myself. But on top of that, now I can actually go ahead and practice in whatever key I want and have the exact same chord progression available to me. So let's hear what it sounds like in the key of D. So you can see it kind of sounds a bit brighter in that key, right? So now I'm going to go ahead and save, by the way, this track. Normally I'm doing that. I'm constantly hitting Command S, saving everything I'm doing. So once you've got this set up, now you can do whatever you want. You can go ahead and even copy and paste these again. And now you can have an even longer thing set up. And the only thing that you need to watch out for is that if you want to make that track even longer, now just make sure you go in here and actually copy and paste the chord progression that you want to loop, or else it's just going to hang out on whatever the last chord was in your progression. So you got to also copy and paste the chord progression. Now, here's a really cool thing that you can do if you want to, is you can actually make one track that changes keys. So look, right here, I'm going to put my playhead right here. Let's change key signatures. Let's change back to the key of C. Boom. So now all of a sudden, I have a track that goes in 2 different keys that I can solo over. So I'm going to go ahead and solo over this thing. So I can work on the exact same progression in multiple keys. And if I wanted to, I could set this thing up to go through all 12 keys. That would be really, really good idea to practice getting familiar in all 12 keys. So let's see what it sounds like. Let me make sure that I got my lead sound dialed up here. And you know what? Let's go ahead and actually tweak this lead sound a little bit, because this is a A little bit too much right now. Let's take this drive down. Yeah, I like that. I like that better. Let's do a little bit more. But this is a plugin called Amplitude, by the way. Fantastic plugin. It's got a bazillion different amp models and all kinds of stuff, and it's not very expensive at all. So I highly recommend it. So now all of a sudden we're gonna be playing over this track, and we're gonna go from the key of D to the key of C. So let's see what I can do over this thing, and we'll wrap the video up. We're about to change keys. And then now we're back in the key of D. So there's so many cool things that you guys can do with this. So if you want to learn how to master the guitar fretboard so that you can play in all 12 keys, and then you can go ahead and apply your skills of playing in all 12 keys to some of the backing tracks that you will make, then make sure you head on over to Jamsville.com and pick up your copy of the Jamsville GPS Fretboard Fundamentals course, which will teach you everything that you need to know in order to navigate any chord progression in any key. Also, make sure you head on over to the Jamsville merch store, pick yourself up an awesome Jamsville t-shirt just like this one. They fit great, they look great. I love wearing mine all over the place. And also, make sure you check out my music on Spotify. I got a song out, it's called My Divine. That's what you're hearing in the background right now. Link is in the description below for that. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and as always, listen, learn, and jam.